Hi Year 12, I've got Section 3 ready for you to annotate your own copies. Now before we start with Section 3 though, we're just going to go back and add an annotation about mirrors, because there is this triptych of mirrors that Woolf is using that kind of has the third one at the beginning of Section 3, but I hadn't kind of pointed it out when we looked at Section 2, so we're doing it a bit retrospectively. So go to page 32. Up the top, I have just given a bit of an explanation for myself about why this is significant, and I've labelled this as Mirror Triptych 1. And the note that I've got here is that Woolf, so Virginia Woolf, she had a lifelong mistrust of mirrors. She felt that they presented a fixed representation of a person, and that really tracks with Clarissa Dalloway being so, I guess, angsty about the fact that she has this inner self that she feels isn't seen because of the exterior that people instead think is all of her. Down the bottom of the page, I've got the annotation note for this first section. Now this is when she's still up in her bedroom prior to getting the dress that she then takes downstairs to mend, and before Peter comes in. And I've underlined seeing the glass, collecting the whole of her at one point as she looked into the glass, and this we'd made a note about previously, but then adding how many million times she had seen her face, and always with the same imperceptible contraction. She alone knew how different, how incompatible and composed. Now, in terms of a colour, I haven't actually colour-coded this as anything. It's just an extra colour. It doesn't kind of fit nicely in with any of those concepts that we're looking at. I guess there is that one of identity, if you wanted to attach it to something. Now, our annotation is the mirror. Clarissa sees her reflection in the mirror as problematic as it contracts a person's being into a fine point. It is not the different, incompatible woman she knows herself to be. Then, when you've got that one done, if you go to page 38, and this is where we have the mirror triptych number 2, and it is actually the entire interaction that she has here with Peter, that back and forth point of view that we have of the two as they have this interaction. And I might just make that a little bit, go in a little bit there for you. So the annotation, you can see I've kind of done it across the bottom. It goes across the 2 pages. Peter and Clarissa observe each other. The mirror's inhuman gaze presents too tidy a representation of the self. Subjectivity is contained, safe. Confronting another person, however, and confronting yourself through that other person's searching gaze makes any stable representation of self impossible to sustain. Human interaction equals disorder. So what that is referring to is the fact that we had that, or Clarissa had that reflection of herself in the mirror that's very fixed and doesn't show who she is on the inside, but the interaction that she and Peter have allows for that more nuanced understanding of who each of them actually is. And it's where it equals disorder. It can, I guess, interrupt that idea of who each felt they are or represent when they're kind of confronted with the other person's opinion of themselves. So now we're going to go back to our Section 3 for today, because the first thing you're going to write down is again this mirror image, and so it's the mirror triptych number 3. And if you wanted to write the annotation before we kind of go and read it, and you'll see where to underline, we've got, now this is happening with Peter's point of view. So section 3, we go into a fairly lengthy section that's just about Peter. And as Peter's walking along, he sees a reflection of himself in a shop window. So, all right, so we had the mirror image of Clarissa's reflection on page 32, the first one. Then we had Peter and Clarissa mirroring each other, but now this one, it's Peter's reflection. It's an effigy metaphor. He refers to himself as an effigy, conveying the limitations of a physical reflection. So an effigy, you might remember from doing V for Vendetta, when they burnt the effigy for Guy Fawkes Day, and it is a representation of someone that can be filled with straw or hollow, and so that external appearance only. All right, so that is the annotation. I'm going to start reading section 3 now. We're on Peter's point of view. We've just had him leaving Clarissa's house after they almost had a moment of perhaps confessing how they really felt before Clarissa's daughter Elizabeth interrupted. And as Peter has left the house, Clarissa has called out, remember my party tonight, remember my party. And he has shut the door, okay? So we are at 11:30 in the morning through to 11:45. We've just got this ongoing time motif here that you'll see, and the orange is for the mirror. Remember my party, said Peter Walsh as he stepped down the street, speaking to himself rhythmically, in time with the flow of the sound, the direct, downright sound of Big Ben striking the half hour. Now for that time motif, we may have actually written this previously. You might already have this here because it goes along with what we've got above. The relentless passing of time. It is indifferent, inconsiderate of the significance of a moment. So you should already have that there. And as he's leaving, and we've got that time being struck by the bells again, there's the rhythmic nature of the bells and the rhythmic nature of Peter saying, remember my party, remember my party. The laden circles dissolved in the air. Oh, these parties, he thought, Clarissa's parties. Why does she give these parties, he thought. Not that he blamed her, or this effigy of a man in a tailcoat with a carnation in his buttonhole coming towards him. Only one person in the world could be as he was, in love, and there he was, this fortunate man himself, reflected in the plate glass window of a motor car manufacturer in Victoria Street. All India lay behind him. Plains, mountains, epidemics of cholera, a district twice as big as Ireland, decisions he had come to alone, he, Peter Walsh, who was now really for the first time in his life, in love. Clarissa had grown hard, he thought, and a trifle sentimental into the bargain, he suspected, looking at the great motor cars capable of doing how many miles on how many gallons? For he had had a turn for mechanics, had invented a plough in his district, had ordered wheelbarrows from England, but the coolies wouldn't use them, all of which Clarissa knew nothing whatever about. The way she said, here is my Elizabeth, that annoyed him. Why not, here's Elizabeth, simply? It was insincere, and Elizabeth didn't like it either. Still, the last tremors of the great booming voice shook the air round him. The half hour. Still early. Only 11:30 still. For he understood young people. He liked them. Now, even though I've got this in the same colour that I did the mirror annotations, it's not to do with the mirrors. It is the just that colour that I'm using that doesn't fit nicely into one of the concepts. So, here's where you're underlining. There was always something cold in Clarissa, he thought. She had always, even as a girl, a sort of timidity, which in middle age becomes conventionality. And then it's all up, he thought, looking rather drearily into the glassy depths, and wondering whether by calling at that hour he had annoyed her, overcome with shame suddenly at having been a fool, wept, been emotional, told her everything as usual. Now, the annotation we've got here Actually it is a little bit to do with the mirror, but it's not the triptych. Peter attempts to think critically of Clarissa, but he's unable to maintain this attempt to deny his love for her, symbolised through the image of the mirrored reflection as stagnant and dreary. So when he's saying, oh, it's the first time I've really been in love, we might think he's talking about the fact that he's still in love with Clarissa, but he's actually trying to deny that, and he is talking about this married woman that he has told Clarissa he's in love with, and he's trying to find all the reasons why he shouldn't love Clarissa, and that she's, she's timid and she's conventional, and but yeah, he doesn't succeed in convincing himself that he has no love for her. Now, you're underlining here with the colour of the nature of time and memory. If you needed a little reminder of the colours that I'm using, I'll just show them to you here. This one is time and memory. As a cloud crosses the sun, silence falls on London and falls on the mind. Effect ceases. Time flaps on the mast. There we stop, there we stand. Rigid, the skeleton of habit alone upholds the human frame. But there is nothing, Peter Walsh said to himself, feeling hollowed out, utterly empty within. Clarissa refused me, he thought. He stood there thinking. Clarissa refused me. And that is going along with the annotation you just wrote down, because this is where we see that he fails to convince himself that he does not care about Clarissa. The note for this bit that you've just underlined is down here. The significance of Peter's irrepressible grief is conveyed by his sense that time has stopped. So where you underlined, it is there we stop, there we stand. So here it's like everything has stopped, and it continues on down here. In a moment we'll read. The power of which transforms the sensation into a collective experience, shifting from third person to first person plural, where we have the we. The universal stillness experienced by all, including the reader, who is left lingering in the moment. So because where he has, kind of said that the cloud crosses the sun and there's this silence and everything stops, and there we stop, there we stand, it is where he's thinking, Clarissa refused me, and the significance of that acknowledgement. Now, this one where I've got St. Margaret's Church, I've got it underlined in red because, again, it doesn't really go with anything in particular, but I didn't want to mix it up with the orange. You don't have to write this one if you don't want to. It's just that the church is personified and it's a metaphor for a hostess. So think about that even if you don't write down that annotation. Ah, said St. Margaret's like a hostess who comes into her drawing room on the very stroke of the hour and finds her guests there already. I am not late. No, it is precisely 11:30, she says. Yet, though she is perfectly right, her voice, being the voice of the hostess, is reluctant to inflict its individuality. Some grief for the past holds it back, some concern for the present. It is 11:30, she says, and the sound of St. Margaret's glides into the recesses of the heart and buries itself in ring after ring of sound, like something alive which wants to confide itself, to disperse itself, to be with a tremor of delight at rest, like Clarissa herself, thought Peter Walsh, coming downstairs on the stroke of the hour in white. Now, I've got the pink here, which is gender identity, social attitudes to women, and then back to this nature of time and memory, added to the note about St. Margaret's Church being a metaphor for a hostess who is reluctant to inflict individuality. So that is that notion of social attitudes to women and that identity of the woman who is reluctant to go against what society expects. And it mirrors the sound of the bells and the nature and confines of time, which is where we've got that colour there. It is Clarissa herself, he thought, with a deep emotion, and an extraordinarily clear yet puzzling recollection of her, as if this bell had come into the room years ago, where they sat at some moment of great intimacy, and had gone from one to the other and had left, like a bee with honey, laden with the moment. But what room? What moment? And why had he been so profoundly happy when the clock was striking? The next bit I've got underlined in the colour for death, mortality and the transience of life. If you wanted to write down the annotation before we read it, as the bells stop, Peter is reminded of mortality. He fears the past can never be retrieved and seeks a retreat from death, seeking the passion of his youth. Then, as the sound of St. Margaret's languished, he thought, she has been ill, and the sound expressed languor and suffering. It was her heart, he remembered, and the sudden loudness of the final stroke told for death that surprised in the midst of life. Clarissa falling where she stood in her drawing-room. No, no, he cried, she is not dead, I am not old, he cried, and marched up Whitehall as if there rolled down to him, vigorous, unending, his future. So he there imagined Clarissa dead, and then he's kind of trying to hold on to this sense of youth. You know, we've got Clarissa feeling like her life is all but over, and he's saying, no, no, not at all. Okay, now this next bit is Peter reflecting on his life. He was not old or set or dried in the least. As for caring what they said of him, the Dalloways, the Whitbreads and their set, he cared not a straw. Not a straw, though it was true he would have some time or other to see whether Richard couldn't help him to some job. Striding, staring, he glared at the statue of the Duke of Cambridge. He had been sent down from Oxford, true. He had been a socialist in some sense of failure, true. Still the future of civilization lies, he thought, in the hands of young men like that. Young men such as he was 30 years ago, with their love of abstract principles, getting books sent out to them all the way from London to a peak in the Himalayas, reading science, reading philosophy. The future lies in the hands of young men like that, he thought. A patter like the patter of leaves in a wood came from behind, and with it a rustling, regular thudding sound, which as it overtook him, drummed his thoughts, strict in step, up Whitehall, without his doing. Boys in uniform carrying guns marched with their eyes ahead of them, marched, their arms stiff, and on their faces an expression like the letters of a legend written round the base of a statue, praising duty, gratitude, fidelity, love of England. So there's some soldiers, young soldiers, who are marching past him. That's what he's looking at. It is, thought Peter Walsh, beginning to keep step with them, a very fine training, but they did not look robust. They were weedy for the most part, boys of 16 who might tomorrow stand behind bowls of rice, cakes of soap on counters. Now they wore on them, unmixed with sensual pleasure or daily preoccupations, the solemnity of the wreath which they had fetched from Finsbury pavement to the empty tomb. They had taken their vow. The traffic respected it. Vans were stopped. So they're marching to an empty tomb. So some, I guess, tribute to a fallen soldier or something like that. So there are lots of statues in England that are monuments to the war, to people who have died, to soldiers. And so actually down here you might, now that I've just said that, if you were to write this one, and it's in that colour of death, mortality, transience of life, the large number of statues provide a constant shadow of death because they're this constant reminder of war and loss and death. And here, this is the mental health, isolation, existential struggles colour. I can't keep up with them, Peter Walsh thought, as they marched up Whitehall, And sure enough, on they marched past him, past everyone in their steady way, as if one will worked legs and arms uniformly, and life, with its varieties, its irreticence, had been laid under a pavement of monuments and wreaths, and drugged into a stiff yet staring corpse by discipline. And the note is, Peter recognises that he doesn't live up to his own critical expectations. One had to respect it. One might laugh, but one had to respect it, he thought. There they go, thought Peter Walsh, pausing at the edge of the pavement. And all the exalted statues, Nelson, Gordon, Havelock, the black, the spectacular images of great soldiers stood looking ahead of them, as if they too had made the same renunciation. Peter Walsh felt he too had made it, the great renunciation, trampled under the same temptations, and achieved at length a marble stare. But the stare Peter Walsh did not want for himself in the least, though he could respect it in others. He could respect it in boys. They don't know the troubles of the flesh yet, he thought, as the marching boys disappeared in the direction of the Strand. All that I've been through, he thought, crossing the road and standing under Gordon's statue. Gordon, whom as a boy he had worshipped. Gordon standing lonely with one leg raised and his arm crossed. Poor Gordon, he thought. Gordon was a soldier, I think. I did look it up. And he was someone who had been kind of highly regarded, and there's this statue of him, but he had come into disrepute. So there was, I can't remember what it was, but there was something about him or something that he'd done that wasn't so good, but Peter's unaware of it here. We're about to see a little bit of existential questioning. So what is the meaning of it all? And just because nobody yet knew he was in London except Clarissa, and the earth after the voyage still seemed an island to him, the strangeness of standing alone, alive, unknown, at 11:30 in Trafalgar Square overcame him. What is it? Where am I? And why, after all, does one do it? He thought, the divorce seeming all moonshine. And down his mind went flat as a marsh, and three great emotions bowled over him: understanding, a vast philanthropy, and finally, as if the result of the others, an irrepressible, exquisite delight, as if inside his brain by another hand strings were pulled, shutters moved, and he, having nothing to do with it, yet stood at the opening of endless avenues, down which he, if he chose, he might wander. He had not felt so young for years. He had escaped, was utterly free, as happens in the downfall of habit, when the mind, like an unguarded flame, bows and bends and seems about to blow from its holding. I haven't felt so young for years, thought Peter, escaping, only of course for an hour or so, from being precisely what he was, and feeling like a child who runs out of doors and sees as he runs his old nurse waving at the wrong window. She's extraordinarily attractive, he thought, as walking across Trafalgar Square in the direction of the Haymarket came a young woman who, as she passed Gordon's statue, seemed, Peter Walsh thought, susceptible as he was, to shed veil after veil until she became the very woman he had always had in his mind. Young but stately, merry but discreet, black but enchanting. Now, this is where he follows this woman. So he kind of sees her, doesn't know her, doesn't actually interact with her, but he imagines her to be this woman that he wants, and he follows her to a house. Now, what I've got written here, and this is kind of an important one, and I've got this under the colour of the search for meaning and fulfillment. Now, one of the big modernist concerns was that within the modern world, meaningful encounters are rare. You're going to see that a lot in T.S. Eliot. Peter constructs his own reality. He follows this woman, creating meaning for himself through an imaginary courtship with an idealised woman, forgetting ageing and reality. because of the war and because of industrialization and all of the stresses that people had, and because of the structures in society and expectations, there was this fear that people just weren't authentic with each other, and that true knowing another person and those very authentic encounters were no longer happening. And so that this is what Woolf is kind of exploring in this section. So here he is following this woman who he imagines to be someone significant for him. Straightening himself up and stealthily fingering his pocket knife, he started after her to follow this woman. This excitement, which seemed even with its back turned to shed on him a light which connected them, which singled him out, as if the random uproar of the traffic had whispered through hollowed hands his name, not Peter, but his private name which he called himself in his own thoughts. "You," she said, "only you," saying it with her white gloves on her shoulders. Then the thin, long cloak which the wind stirred as he walked past Dent's shop in Cockspur Street blew out with an enveloping kindness, a mournful tenderness, as of arms that would open and take the tired... But she's not married? She's young, quite young, thought Peter. The red carnation he had seen her wear as she came across Trafalgar Square, burning again in his eyes and making her lips red. But she waited at the curbstone. There was a dignity about her. She was not worldly, like Clarissa, not rich, like Clarissa. Was she, he wondered as she moved, respectable? Witty, with a lizard's flickering tongue. He thought, for one must invent, must allow oneself a little diversion. A cool, waiting wit, a darting wit, not noisy. She moved, she crossed, he followed her. To embarrass her was the last thing he wished. Still, if she stopped, he would say, "Come and have an ice." He would say, and she would answer perfectly simply, "Oh, yes." But other people got between them in the street, obstructing him, blotting her out. He pursued, she changed. There was colour in her cheeks, mockery in her eyes. He was an adventurer, reckless, he thought, swift, daring, indeed, landed as he was last night from India, a romantic buccaneer, careless of all these damned proprieties. Yellow dressing gowns, pipes, fishing rods in the shop windows, and respectability in evening parties, and spruce old men wearing white slips beneath their waistcoats. He was a buccaneer. On and on she went across Piccadilly and up Regent Street, ahead of him, her cloak, her gloves, her shoulders, combining with the fringes and the laces and the feather boas in the windows to make the spirit of finery and whimsy which dwindled out of the shops on the pavement as the light of a lamp goes wavering at night over hedges in the darkness. Laughing and delightful, she had crossed Oxford Street and Great Portland Street and turned down one of the little streets, and now, the great moment was approaching, for now she slackened, opened her bag, and with one look in his direction, but not at him, one look that bade farewell, summed up the whole situation and dismissed it triumphantly, forever, had fitted her key, opened the door, and gone. Clarissa's voice saying, remember my party, sang in his ears. The house was one of those flat red houses with hanging flower baskets of vague impropriety. It was over. Well, I've had my fun. I've had it, he thought, looking up at the swinging baskets of pale geraniums. And as you can see this next bit with the mental health, isolation, existential colour, existentialist concerns about the fragility of life and awareness of mortality. And it was smashed to atoms, his fun, for it was half made up, as he knew very well. Invented, this escapade with the girl. Made up as one makes up the better part of life, he thought. Making oneself up, making her up, creating an exquisite amusement and something more. But odd it was, and quite true. All this one could never share. It smashed to atoms. He turned, went up the street, thinking to find somewhere to sit, till it was time for Lincoln's Inn, for Messieurs Hooper and Greatley. Where should he go? No matter. Up the street then, toward Regent's Park. His boots on the pavement struck out. No matter, for it was early, still very early. It was a splendid morning too, like the pulse of a perfect heart. Life struck straight through the streets. There was no fumbling, no hesitation, sweeping and swerving accurately, punctually, noiselessly. There, precisely at the right instant, the motor car stopped at the door. The girl, silk-stockinged, feathered, evanescent, but not to him particularly attractive, for he'd had his fling, alighted. Admirable butlers, tawny chow dogs, halls laid in black and white lozenges with white blinds blowing. Peter saw through the open door and approved of. A splendid achievement in its own way, after all. London, the season, civilization. Coming as he did from a respectable Anglo-Indian family which, for at least 3 generations, had administered the affairs of a continent. It's strange, he thought, what a sentiment I have about that, disliking India and empire and army as he did. There were moments when civilization, even of this sort, seemed dear to him as a personal possession. Moments of pride in England, in butlers, chow dogs, girls in their security. Ridiculous enough, still there it is, he thought. And the doctors and men of business and capable women all going about their business, punctual, alert, robust, seemed to him wholly admirable. Good fellows to whom one would entrust one's life, companions in the art of living, who would see one through. So here, look, he's just kind of listing and noticing all the things that he can see. And so the woman getting out of the car and going into the house, and as she opens the door, what he sees through the open doorway, and he's connecting with it and saying that he admires these aspects at times. What with one thing and another, the show was really very tolerable, and he would sit down in the shade and smoke. There was Regent's Park. Yes, as a child he had walked in Regent's Park. Odd, he thought, how the thought of childhood keeps coming back to me. The result of seeing Clarissa, perhaps. For women live much more in the past than we do, he thought. They attach themselves to places and their fathers. A woman's always proud of a father. Burton was a nice place, a very nice place, but I could never get on with the old man, he thought. There was quite a scene one night, an argument about something or other. What he could not remember. Politics, presumably. Yes, he remembered Regent's Park, the long straight walk, the little house where one bought air balls to the left, an absurd statue with an inscription somewhere or other. He looked for an empty seat. He did not want to be bothered, feeling a little drowsy as he did, by people asking him the time. An elderly grey nurse with a baby asleep in its perambulator. That was the best he could do for himself. Sit down at the far end of the seat by that nurse. Now here, the nature of time and memory and annotation symbolism. The issue of time passing bothers him as he feels he has not achieved anything substantial. So he's sitting down on a park bench at Regent's Park. She's a queer-looking girl, he thought, suddenly remembering Elizabeth as she came into the room and stood by her mother. Grown big, quite grown up, not exactly pretty, handsome rather. She can't be more than 18. Probably she doesn't get on with Clarissa. Here's my Elizabeth, that sort of thing. Why not here's Elizabeth, simply? Try to make out like most mothers that things are what they're not. She trusts to her charm too much, he thought. She overdoes it. The rich, benignant cigar eddied coolly down his throat. He puffed it out again in rings which breasted the air bravely for a moment, blue, circular. I shall try and get a word alone with Elizabeth tonight, he thought. Then began to wobble into hourglass shapes and taper away. Odd shapes they take, he thought. Suddenly he closed his eyes, raised his hand with an effort, and threw away the heavy end of his cigar. A great brush swept smooth across his mind, sweeping across it moving branches, children's voices, the shuffle of feet, and people passing and humming, traffic, rising and falling, traffic, down, down. He sank into the plumes and feathers of sleep, sank and was muffled over. So he's fallen asleep on the park bench. And so here, this is the moment of falling asleep. So this kind of listing of things is that feeling that Woolf is conveying. Now, the next bit that we have that goes for almost 2 pages is it's what we call a poetic interlude. So we switch from it being the point of view of one of our characters or a character, and we've got an omniscient narrator. Now, this is Peter's dream, and in his dream, he dreams about a solitary traveller, right? So it's called the solitary traveller. And the solitary traveller conceives of different types of women, but they're stereotypes. The lover, the mother, and this emphasises Peter's desire to be saved and redeemed through relationships with women. Now, as the dream is occurring, the solitary traveller is kind of this dream character in its own sense, but it also serves to represent Peter. It is his dream after all. Now, I've just got this as a bit of an explanation. So, Peter's dream, the solitary traveller, equals an indistinct figure, occasionally taking on Peter's character, but then shedding it to assume the more abstract and universal position of man in the modern world. So whilst we can see, oh yes, it's representative of Peter, it's also got that broader representation of man in the modern world. And the solitary traveller conjures up these images of women. I think it goes along with that idea of that lack of authentic connection and that desire for something that you can't quite achieve that is a modernist concern. The grey nurse resumed her knitting as Peter Walsh on the hot seat beside her began snoring. In a grey dress, moving her hands indefatigably yet quietly, she seemed like the champion of the rights of sleepers, like one of those spectral presences which rise in twilight in woods made of sky and branches. The solitary traveller, hunter of lanes, disturber of ferns, and devastator of great hemlock plants, looking up suddenly sees the giant figure at the end of the ride. By conviction an atheist perhaps, he, and think of that as the solitary traveller, not Peter, is taken by surprise with moments of extraordinary exaltation. Nothing exists outside us except a state of mind, he thinks. A desire for solace, for relief, for something outside these miserable pygmies, these feeble, these ugly, these craven men and women. But if he can conceive of her, then in some sort she exists, he thinks. And advancing down the path with his eyes upon sky and branches, he rapidly endows them with womanhood, sees with amazement how grave they become. How majestically, as the breeze stirs them, they dispense with the dark flutter of the leaves, charity, comprehension, absolution, and then, flinging themselves suddenly aloft, confound the piety of their aspect with a wild carouse. Such are the visions which proffer great cornucopias full of fruit to the solitary traveller, or murmur in his ears like sirens lolloping away on the great sea waves, or are dashed in his face like bunches of roses, or rise to the surface like pale faces which fishermen flounder through floods to embrace. Such are the visions. Now we're annotating this because it occurs again over here. We've got an Africa happening, don't we? Okay, so I don't think I've written anaphora, but that's what it is. When he's talking here about the vision, so he sees a woman in the tree, like he imagines that the branches are a woman. And here when he's talking about being in the ocean, the sirens are they're meant to be these female seductresses of the ocean, the sirens. And I think they were mythically associated with boats sinking and things like that they could lure men to their death. Such are the visions which ceaselessly float up, pace beside, put their faces in front of the actual thing, often overpowering the solitary traveller and taking away from him the sense of the earth, the wish to return, and giving him for substitute a general peace, as if, so he thinks as he advances down the forest ride, all this fever of living was simplicity itself, and myriads of things merged in one thing, and this figure made of sky and branches as it is, had risen from the troubled sea. He is elderly, past 50 now, as a shape might be sucked up out of the waves to shower down from her magnificent hands compassion, comprehension, absolution. Now, I've got this in the search of meaning and fulfillment, and I've got the desire for a God in a godless world. So this is when people were moving away from religion but still wanting that meaning in life. And often people speak about religion or God as being compassionate, providing absolution and making sense of the world through religion. So I saw that as that search for meaning. So he thinks, may I never go back to the lamplight, to the sitting room, never finish my book, never knock out my pipe, never ring for Mrs. Turner to clear away. Rather, let me walk straight on to this great figure who will, with a toss of her head, mount me on her streamers and let me blow to nothingness with the rest. Such are the visions. The solitary traveller is soon beyond the wood, and there, coming to the door with shaded eyes, possibly to look for his return, with hands raised, with white apron blowing, is an elderly woman who seems, so powerful is this infirmity, to seek over the desert a lost son, to search for a rider destroyed, to be the figure of the mother whose sons have been killed in the battles of the world. So, as the solitary traveller advances down the village street where the women stand knitting and the men dig in the garden, the evening seems ominous, the figures still, as if some august fate known to them, awaited without fear, were about to sweep them into complete annihilation. So the black meaning death, mortality, and we've got here war imagery. So it's the mother figure here and the mother whose sons have been killed at war. So we've got this intrusive, unavoidable death and suffering. And with intrusive there, I meant it in terms of regardless of what's kind of going on in the minds of the characters or throughout the day, these reminders of death are unavoidable. They keep intruding. Indoors among ordinary things, the cupboard, the table, the windowsill with its geraniums, suddenly the outline of the landlady bending to remove the cloth becomes soft with light, an adorable emblem which only the recollection of cold human contacts forbids us to embrace. She takes the marmalade. She shuts it in the cupboard. There is nothing more tonight, sir. But to whom does the solitary traveller make reply? Now, this is the end of the dream. This last question here, I've got this with mental health, isolation, existential. It's quite a sad question because in a modern world, no god or woman or any figure at all exists to save him in the way he wishes to be saved. The final question is a painful reminder of Peter's loneliness. No real woman exists who can save him. I mean, he talks about being in love with this married woman, but he's got this passionate love for Clarissa that he can't deny, but they're not together and they never will be, and so there's this real loneliness here. So the elderly nurse knitted over the sleeping baby in Regent's Park. So Peter Walsh snored. And now we're switching to Peter's point of view again. He woke with extreme suddenness, saying to himself, "The death of the soul." "Lord, Lord," he said to himself out loud, stretching and opening his eyes. "The death of the soul." The words attached themselves to some scene, to some room, to some past he had been dreaming of. It became clearer, the scene, the room, the past he had been dreaming of. It was Bourton that summer, early in the 90s, when he was so passionately in love with Clarissa. Now, just before I keep reading, you'll see that you'll underline the death of the soul a couple more times down here. The note we've got for it. Now, this reflects a central modernist concern. Modern society, patriarchy and conformity have destroyed individual identity and the loss of hope in religion after World War I, which has amounted to alienation and a fragmentation of self. And there was a real concern that the soul of man had been destroyed through the horrors of war and the loss of religious purpose. Now, we're about to go into this memory of Peter's about Bourton. Now, we had Clarissa's before where she spoke about how happy she was there and, of course, about her relationship with Sally and the kiss and how that kiss with Sally was the most important moment and the happiest moment of her life. Peter's memory works in parallel to that, and so towards the end of it you'll write something about this, but his memories are far less happy, and for him the memories are of the rejection he received from Clarissa, and that being the most painful moment of his life. This is just another thing to add for the death of the soul, okay? And I've got it here in the death mortality colour. The death of the spirit with physical survival, so meaning for the returned soldiers, Septimus Smith with the PTSD, he has physically survived, but his spirit has died. So that is also relating to this death of the soul repetition. Okay. It was at Bourton that summer, early in the 90s, when he was so passionately in love with Clarissa. There were a great many people there, laughing and talking, sitting around a table after tea. The room was bathed in yellow light and full of cigarette smoke. They were talking about a man who had married his housemaid, one of the neighbouring squires. He had forgotten his name. He had married his housemaid, and she had been brought to Bourton to call. An awful visit it had been. She was absurdly overdressed. Like a cockatoo, Clarissa had said, imitating her. And she never stopped talking. On and on she went, on and on. Clarissa imitated her. Then somebody said, Sally Seaton it was, did it make any real difference to one's feelings to know that before they'd married, she had had a baby? In those days in mixed company, it was a bold thing to say. He could see Clarissa now turning bright pink, somehow contracting and saying, "Oh, I shall never be able to speak to her again," whereupon the whole party sitting round the tea table seemed to wobble. It was very uncomfortable. He hadn't blamed her for minding the fact, since in those days a girl brought up as she was knew nothing, but it was her manner that annoyed him. Timid, hard, arrogant, prudish. The death of the soul. He had said that instinctively, ticketing the moment as he used to do. The death of her soul. Everyone wobbled. Everyone seemed to bow as she spoke, and then to stand up different. He could see Sally Seaton, like a child who has been in mischief, leaning forward, rather flushed, wanting to talk but afraid, and Clarissa did frighten people. She was Clarissa's greatest friend, always about the place, an attractive creature, handsome, dark, with a reputation in those days of great daring, and he used to give her cigars which she smoked in her bedroom, and she had either been engaged to somebody or quarrelled with her family, and old Parry disliked them both equally, which was a great bond. Then Clarissa, still with an air of being offended with them all, got up, made some excuse, and went off alone. As she opened the door, in came that great shaggy dog which ran after sheep. She flung herself upon him, went into raptures. It was as if she said to Peter, it was all aimed at him, he knew, "I know you thought me absurd about that woman just now. Just see how extraordinarily sympathetic I am. See how I love my Rob." Now, here he's actually misreading the situation, because Clarissa is just interested in Sally here and vice versa. And so where he says, she frightened people, and he's talking about, Sally seeming to be a bit, what do you say, that she was like a child, rather flushed, wanting to talk but afraid. Well, we know that she wasn't afraid. She was, she had a big crush on Clarissa, and that was why she looked like that, not through fear. And when he thinks that Clarissa is doing things to impress Peter, she's not. She's doing them for Sally. They had always this queer power of communicating without words. She knew directly he criticised her. Then she would do something quite obvious to defend herself, like this fuss with the dog, but it never took him in. He always saw through Clarissa. Not that he said anything, of course, just sat looking glum. It was that way their quarrels often began. She shut the door. At once he became extremely depressed. It all seemed useless, going on being in love, going on quarrelling, going on making it up, and he wandered off alone among outhouses, stables, looking at the horses. The place was quite a humble one. Parrys were never very well off, but there were always grooms and stable boys about. Clarissa loved riding, and an old coachman, what was his name? An old nurse, old Moody, old Goody, some such name they called her, whom one was taken to visit in a little room with lots of photographs, lots of bird cages. It was an awful evening. He grew more and more gloomy, not about that only, about everything. And he couldn't see her, couldn't explain to her, couldn't have it out. There were always people about. She'd go on as if nothing had happened. That was the devilish part of her, this coldness, this woodenness, something very profound in her which he had felt again this morning talking to her, an impenetrability. Yet heaven knows he loved her. She had some queer power of fiddling on one's nerves, turning one's nerves to fiddle strings, yes. He had gone in to dinner rather late, from some idiotic idea of making himself felt, and had sat down by old Miss Parry, Aunt Helena, Mr. Parry's sister, who was supposed to preside. There she sat in her white cashmere shawl, with her head against the window, a formidable old lady, but kind to him, for he had found her some rare flower, and she was a great botanist, marching off in thick boots with a black tin collecting box slung between her shoulders. He sat down beside her and couldn't speak. Everything seemed to race past him. He just sat there eating, and halfway through dinner he made himself look across at Clarissa for the first time. She was talking to a young man on her right. He had a sudden revelation. She will marry that man, he said to himself. He didn't even know his name. For of course it was that afternoon, that very afternoon, that Dalloway had come over, and Clarissa had called him Wickham. That was the beginning of it all. Somebody had brought him over, and Clarissa got his name wrong. She introduced him to everybody as Wickham. At last he said, "My name is Dalloway." That was his first view of Richard, a fair young man, rather awkward, sitting on a deck chair and blurting out, "My name is Dalloway." Sally got hold of it. Always after that she called him, "My name is Dalloway." He was a prey to revelations at that time. This one, that she would marry Dalloway, was blinding, overwhelming at the moment. There was a sort of, how could he put it, a sort of ease in her manner to him, something maternal, something gentle. They were talking about politics. All through dinner he tried to hear what they were saying. Afterwards he could remember standing by old Miss Parry's chair in the drawing-room. Clarissa came up with her perfect manners, like a real hostess, and wanted to introduce him to someone, spoke as if they had never met before, which enraged him. Yet even then he admired her for it. He admired her courage, her social instinct. He admired her power of carrying things through. The perfect hostess, he said to her, whereupon she winced all over. But he meant her to feel it. He would have done anything to hurt her, after seeing her with Dalloway. So she left him, and he had a feeling that they were all gathered together in a conspiracy against him, laughing and talking behind his back. There he stood by Miss Parry's chair as though he had been cut out of wood, talking about wildflowers. Never, never had he suffered so infernally. He must have forgotten even to pretend to listen. At last he woke up. He saw Miss Parry looking rather disturbed, rather indignant, with her prominent eyes fixed. He almost cried out that he couldn't attend because he was in hell. People began going out of the room. He heard them talking about fetching cloaks, about it being cold on the water and so on. They were going boating on the lake by moonlight, one of Sally's mad ideas. He could hear her describing the moon. They all went out. He was left quite alone. "Don't you want to go with them?" said Aunt Helena. Poor old lady, she had guessed. And he turned round, and there was Clarissa again. She had come back to fetch him. He was overcome by her generosity, her goodness. "Come along," she said. "They're waiting." He had never felt so happy in his whole life. Without a word they made it up. They walked down to the lake. He had 20 minutes of perfect happiness. Her voice, her laugh, her dress, something floating white crimson, her spirit, her adventurousness. She made them all disembark and explore the island. She startled a hen. She laughed, she sang, and all the time he knew perfectly well Dalloway was falling in love with her. She was falling in love with Dalloway, but it didn't seem to matter. Nothing mattered. They sat on the ground and talked, he and Clarissa. They went in and out of each other's minds without any effort, and then in a second it was over. He said to himself as they were getting into the boat, She will marry that man. Dully, without any resentment, but it was an obvious thing. Dalloway would marry Clarissa. Dalloway rode them in. He said nothing. But somehow as they watched him start jumping onto his bicycle to ride 20 miles through the woods, wobbling off down the drive, waving his hand and disappearing, he obviously did feel instinctively, tremendously, strongly all that. The night, the romance, Clarissa, he deserved to have her. For himself, he was absurd. His demands upon Clarissa, he could see it now, were absurd. So up here I've got Clarissa chose a safe, conventional life over a more, perhaps tumultuous one with Peter. And so he's reflecting on the difficulties that he saw in himself with his relationship with Clarissa. And I think, with this comfortable life, it is, however, without the passion that she has with Peter. For himself, he was absurd. His demands upon Clarissa, he could see it now, were absurd. He asked impossible things. He made terrible scenes. She would have accepted him still, perhaps, if he had been less absurd. Sally thought so. She read him all that summer long letters, how they had talked of him, how they had praised him, how Clarissa burst into tears. It was an extraordinary summer, all letters, scenes, telegrams, arriving at Burton early in the morning, hanging about till the servants were up, appalling tete-a-tetes with old Mr. Parry at breakfast, Aunt Helena formidable but kind, Sally sweeping him off for talks in the vegetable garden, Clarissa in bed with headaches. The final scene, the terrible scene which he believed had mattered more than anything in the whole of his life, might be an exaggeration, but still, so it did seem now, happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon of a very hot day. It was a trifle that led up to it. Sally at lunch saying something about Dalloway and calling him, "My name is Dalloway," whereupon Clarissa suddenly stiffened, coloured in a way she had, and rapped out sharply, "We've had enough of that feeble joke." That was all, but for him it was as if she had said, "I'm only amusing myself with you. I've an understanding with Richard Dalloway." So he took it. He had not slept for nights. "It's got to be finished one way or the other," he said to himself. He sent a note to her by Sally, asking her to meet him by the fountain at 3. "Something very important has happened," he scribbled at the end of it. The fountain was in the middle of a little shrubbery far from the house, with shrubs and trees all round it. There she came, even before the time, and they stood with the fountain between them, the spout, it was broken, dribbling water incessantly. How sights fix themselves upon the mind. For example, the vivid green moss. She did not move. "Tell me the truth, tell me the truth," he kept on saying. He felt as if his forehead would burst. She seemed contracted, petrified. She did not move. "Tell me the truth," he repeated, when suddenly that old man, Brickhoff, popped his head in carrying the Times, stared at them, gaped, and went away. They neither of them moved. "Tell me the truth," he repeated. He felt that he was grinding against something physically hard. She was unyielding. She was like iron, like flint, rigid up the backbone. And when she said, "It's no use, it's no use, this is the end," after he had spoken for hours, it seemed, with the tears running down his cheeks, it was as if she had hit him in the face. She turned, she left him, she went away. "Clarissa," he cried, "Clarissa!" But she never came back. It was over. He went away that night. He never saw her again. All right, and this was what I was mentioning before. So what we've got written is Peter's memory of Burton is parallel to Clarissa's memory. Clarissa's kiss with Sally is the greatest moment of her life. Peter's memory of Clarissa's rejection is the worst moment of his life. And in addition to that, the romance and passion of their younger selves stands in contrast with the conformity and banality of their middle-aged selves. And that is section 3, all done. I've gotten it in under the hour, which is fantastic. I'll endeavour to get the next section up as soon as I can, guys.